The air is thick, smelling of damp earth and wood smoke that clings to the back of your throat. You feel a rhythmic, heavy pulse in your chest, the kind of thumping heat that comes from a fever or a long run through the brush. Your skin is slick with sweat, but the air around you is cooling as the sun dips below the jagged horizon. In this world, you have no books, no biology degree, and no concept of a cell. You don't even have a word for a month or a year. Yet, you are about to participate in the most complex biological event in the known universe. You are going to ensure the survival of your entire species, but here is the paradox. You have absolutely no idea how it works. You feel the urge, the magnetic pull toward another person, but you don't know that this pull is a bridge to a new life. You don't know that 9 months from now, a new human will appear because of what you do tonight. How is it possible to master a process when you don't even know the process exists? Was it all just luck, or was there a hidden teacher guiding us through the dark? We often assume that reproduction is just instinct, a pre-programmed software running in our brains that tells us exactly what to do. But if you think instinct is a clear instruction manual, you're mistaken. Instinct is more like a hunger or a thirst. It tells you that you need something, but it doesn't explain the chemistry of why you need it. For early humans, the drive to mate was intense, but the link between that drive and the arrival of a baby was a massive cognitive gap. Think about the timeline. If you eat a poisonous berry, you get sick within an hour. The cause and the effect are linked by a short, obvious thread. But reproduction is different. The act happens, and then for weeks, nothing changes. Months go by. The belly grows slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. By the time the baby arrives, the original act is a distant memory, buried under hundreds of meals and dozens of migrations. For a long time, researchers believed our ancestors lived in a state of paternity ignorance. They thought early humans saw birth as a magical event, something that just happened to women like a change in the weather. But was the human mind really that disconnected from reality? To find the answer, we have to look at the parts of our body that we've forgotten how to use. In the late 20th century, scientists began looking closely at the vomeronasal organ, often called the Jacobson's organ. In many mammals, this tiny structure in the nose detects pheromones, chemical signals that broadcast a female's fertility or a male's health. While some modern researchers, like those in a 2011 study on human chemosignals, argue that our vomeronasal organ is mostly a vestige, our ancestors relied on it heavily. They didn't need to know a woman was fertile in her cycle. They could smell it. It wasn't a conscious thought like, she is ovulating. It was a sudden, unexplained spike in attraction. Their bodies were communicating in a language their minds hadn't learned to speak yet. This chemical conversation bypassed the need for a biology textbook. But even if pheromones got them into the same space, it still doesn't explain how they understood the consequences. If the smell was the hook, what kept them from being confused when the result showed up 3 seasons later? This brings us to one of the most famous and controversial studies in anthropology. In the early 1900s, a man named Bronislaw Malinowski traveled to the Trobriand Islands. He spent years living with the people there and claimed they had no idea that men played a role in reproduction. According to Malinowski's 1916 reports, the islanders believed that a woman became pregnant when a spirit, called a boloma, entered her body while she was wading in the ocean. They saw the act of mating as a way to open the path for the spirit, but they didn't see the man as the source of the child's life. For decades, this was used as proof that early humans were biologically illiterate. Critics later argued that the Trobriand people were speaking metaphorically, but the study raised a haunting question. If a group of intelligent humans could live for thousands of years believing spirits caused babies, did they ever actually know the truth? Or did they just find a story that was close enough to the truth to keep the species moving forward? But if the spirit child theory was their reality, why did they still choose to stay together in pairs? This is where the mystery of the human heart collides with the cold facts of the human hip. In 1960, an anthropologist named Sherwood Washburn coined the term the obstetrical dilemma. It's the idea that as humans started walking on 2 legs, our pelvises got narrower to support our weight. At the same time, our brains were getting much bigger. This created a biological crisis. Human babies have to be born early compared to other primates because if they stayed in the womb any longer, their heads wouldn't fit through the birth canal. Unlike a baby gazelle that can stand up and run minutes after birth, a human baby is completely helpless for years. It is a massive drain on resources. If early humans didn't understand that they were the fathers of these children, why would they stay and hunt for them? Why would they protect a mother who was slowed down by a screaming, hungry infant? Perhaps they didn't need to understand genetics to understand ownership. Even if the Trobriand Islanders believed in spirits, they still noticed that children often looked like the men they were around. They noticed the patterns. This is what Dr. Holly Dunsworth, a prominent evolutionary biologist, calls the discovery of paternity. She argues that at some point, the human brain became powerful enough to track long-term data. We started noticing that if man A and woman B spent time together, the spirit that arrived 9 months later often had man A's nose or his height. It wasn't a sudden, moment in a lab. It was a slow, multi-generational realization. We became the only animal on Earth that could connect a past event to a future result over a nearly year-long gap. This realization changed everything. It created the concept of the family, the tribe, and eventually, the idea of inheritance. But how did we bridge the gap before that discovery was made? The answer might be found by looking at our closest cousins in the wild. If you watch a troop of chimpanzees, you'll notice they don't have marriage or paternity tests. However, they do have complex social structures. Male chimps will often protect females they have mated with, not because they know the baby is theirs in a scientific sense, but because of a biological bond formed during the act itself. In humans, this was likely amplified by the loss of certain physical traits. Research by paleoanthropologist Owen Lovejoy on the 4.4-million-year-old skeleton of Ardipithecus ramidus shows that early human males had much smaller canine teeth than their ancestors. In the primate world, big canines are for fighting other males to get mating rights. Smaller canines suggest a shift toward pair bonding. We stopped fighting everyone and started choosing someone. We traded the war for a partnership long before we knew what that partnership would produce. But if we weren't fighting for mates anymore, what was the new risk we were taking? Every time a woman in the ancient world became pregnant, she was stepping into a life-threatening gamble. Before modern medicine, the leading cause of death for women was childbirth. There were no sterile tools, no pain relief, and no way to handle a baby that was positioned the wrong way. Early humans saw this. They watched their sisters, mothers, and daughters die in the process of bringing new life into the world. This is the part of the story that instinct doesn't explain. Instinct makes you want to mate, but reason should make you want to avoid something that kills 1 out of every 5 women in your tribe. Yet they kept going. They didn't stop. They didn't let the fear of the ending stop the beginning. They developed rituals, songs, and midwifery knowledge that was passed down through whispers and touch. They used herbs like yarrow or willow bark to manage the pain, and they learned how to use gravity to help the baby move. They were practicing medicine 50,000 years before the first hospital was built. But what if the knowledge they were using wasn't just about the body, but about the stars? Many ancient cultures, from the San people of southern Africa to the indigenous groups of Australia, have deep traditions linking the moon to the female cycle. They noticed that the moon changed its shape every 29.5 days, and the female body seemed to follow a similar rhythm. This wasn't just a coincidence to them, it was a map. By tracking the phases of the moon, women could predict when they were most likely to conceive or when their next cycle would begin. This was the first calendar. Long before we were tracking the seasons for farming, we were tracking the sky for our own bodies. We were using the entire universe to explain why we felt the way we did. It was a beautiful, complex system of myths that actually led to very practical results. They might have been wrong about why the moon affected them, but they were right about the timing. But even with the perfect calendar, there was one thing they couldn't control: the mystery of who would survive. There is a concept in evolutionary psychology called the grandmother hypothesis. It suggests that humans live so long after their reproductive years because we need elders to ensure the survival of the next generation. In a world where birth was a mystery and a danger, The grandmother was the library. She was the one who had seen 100 births and knew how to handle the ones that went wrong. She was the one who remembered which roots helped a mother produce more milk. This collective memory turned a biological event into a cultural one. We didn't just reproduce like animals, we learned like humans. We built a safety net of stories and experiences that allowed a helpless infant to grow into a hunter. We turned the delay of 9 months into a period of preparation. The tribe would gather extra food, find a safe cave, and prepare for the arrival of the spirit. They treated it as a communal event because they knew that a single mother couldn't survive alone. But did they realize that this communal effort was actually shaping the future of the entire human race? The turning point likely came during the Neolithic Revolution, when humans started domesticating animals. When you're living in a cave, you see a birth every few months if you're lucky. But when you're a shepherd with a flock of 50 sheep, you see birth every single day. You see the ram and the ewe. You see the result. You see that if you keep the ram away, no lambs are born. This was the smoking gun of biology. Watching animals in a controlled environment stripped away the mystery of the spirit child. It made reproduction something you could manage, like planting a seed in the ground. In fact, many of our earliest words for reproduction come from agriculture. We talk about seeding, fertile soil, and reaping. We took the lessons of the farm and applied them to our own skin. This was the moment we stopped being passengers in the process and started being the pilots. We realized that we weren't just victims of an urge, we were the architects of a lineage. But what was the cost of this new, cold understanding? When reproduction became a science rather than a mystery, it changed the way we treated each other. Once paternity was discovered and understood, men began to worry about whether the children they were feeding were actually theirs. This led to the creation of strict social laws, the concept of purity, and the control of women's bodies. We traded the mystery of the spirit for the certainty of the bloodline, and that trade came with a heavy price in human freedom. We began to view children as property and inheritance rather than as gifts from the forest. The wow factor of a new human appearing out of nowhere was replaced by the legalities of who owned the land that human would eventually walk on. We gained power over our biology, but we lost some of the awe that came with the unknown. We became a species that could calculate its own future, but we forgot how to live in the pulse of the present. Think back to that person by the fire 50,000 years ago. They didn't have the burden of this knowledge. To them, the feeling in their chest and the heat on their skin was enough. They followed the scent, they trusted the moon, and they looked into the eyes of a newborn with a sense of wonder that we struggle to find in a world of ultrasound and DNA kits. They didn't know how to reproduce in the way a doctor knows, but they knew how to survive in a way we've forgotten. They knew that life was a circle that required everyone to hold hands. They knew that the spirit was real, even if its name was actually biology. They were the bridge that carried us out of the darkness, walking a path they couldn't see, toward a future they couldn't imagine. But was their ignorance a weakness, or was it their greatest strength? Because if they had known the true odds, if they had known the sheer statistical impossibility of a single sperm finding a single egg, the 20% mortality rate of the mother, the 50% mortality rate of the infant, and the years of grueling labor required to keep that child alive, would they have ever started? If they had the data we have now, would they have looked at that fire and decided it was too much of a risk? Probably not. Because nature doesn't ask for your permission or your understanding. It just asks for your participation. It uses the sweat on your skin and the pulse in your chest to bypass your brain entirely. We like to think we are the ones in charge, that we are the ones deciding to have families and build futures. But we are still just that same person by the fire, following a chemical trail that was laid down millions of years before we ever learned how to speak. We aren't the masters of the process, we are the process itself. And here is the cold, undeniable fact that we often try to ignore. Your entire existence is the result of a multi-million-year winning streak that has nothing to do with your choice. Every single one of your ancestors, going back to the first single-celled organism in the primeval soup, succeeded in reproducing before they died. Not one of them failed. Not one of them was too tired, too scared, or too confused to pass the flame to the next hand. You are the tip of a spear that has been flying through the dark for eternity, powered by an engine you don't control and don't fully understand. You think you are watching this video because you are curious about the past, but the truth is much simpler and much more haunting. You are watching this because you are wired to obsessed over the mechanism of your own creation. Your ancestors didn't need to know how to reproduce because the universe had already decided they would. And it has already decided the same for you. You are not the observer of this history, you are the evidence of it. Does it make you feel better to know the science? Or do you miss the time when you could just blame it on the moon? As you sit there now, breathing in the air of a world filled with screens and certainty, remember that the pulse in your chest is the same one that thundered in the darkness 50,000 years ago. The knowledge we've gained hasn't changed the fundamental reality of the act. It hasn't made the stakes any lower or the mystery any less profound. We've just given it new names. We call it ovulation instead of the moon's shadow. We call it genetics instead of the ancestor's breath. But when the lights go out and the fire burns down to embers, we are still just animals trying to find each other in the dark, hoping that something of us will remain after we're gone. The caveman didn't need to understand the baby because he understood the woman. He didn't need to understand the future because he understood the urge. And maybe, in our rush to explain everything, we've forgotten that the most important things in life don't require an explanation, they just require you to show up. But how much longer can we rely on instinct alone in a world that is changing faster than our biology can keep up with? We are now entering an era where we can edit the very genes our ancestors didn't even know existed. We are taking the magic out of the spirit child and putting it into a petri dish. We are becoming the gods our ancestors used to pray to. Is that a triumph, or is it the beginning of the end of the very thing that made us human? We have spent 200,000 years trying to solve the mystery of where we come from. Now that we have the answer, we might find that the mystery was the only thing keeping us together. The person by the fire looks at you across the vast stretch of time, their skin slick with sweat and their heart thumping with a rhythm you recognize in your own blood. They don't know your name, and they don't know your science. They only know that tonight, the path must be opened. They only know that the tribe must continue. They are the reason you are breathing right now. They did the work so you could ask the questions. And as you look back at them, you have to wonder, which of you is truly the one who knows what they're doing? Is it the person who understands the cell, or the person who understands the fire? The truth is that every breath you take is a legacy of an ancient, wordless contract. You didn't ask to be here, and you didn't choose the biology that demands you keep the cycle going. You are a biological machine, a vessel for a code that is older than the mountains and more complex than any computer ever built. While you sit in your climate-controlled room, feeling safe in your knowledge of how it works, the reality is that your body is still making decisions for you every second of the day. It is tracking pheromones you can't smell, reacting to cycles you don't feel, and preparing for a future you can't predict. You are a passenger in a vehicle that was designed 100,000 years ago, and no amount of science will ever give you the steering wheel. You are here because they succeeded in the dark, and you will leave behind a world that won't care if you understood the biology or not. The cycle doesn't need your knowledge, it only needs your life. And in the end, that is the only fact that has ever truly mattered. If you found this dive into our deep past fascinating, there is so much more to uncover about the secrets hidden in our DNA. We're on a journey to piece together the full story of what it means to be human, one mystery at a time. What part of our ancestors' lives do you think would be the hardest for us to handle today? Let's talk about it in the comments, and if you want to keep exploring these rabbit holes with us, feel free to subscribe. Your curiosity is the only thing that keeps this story alive.